Why do you say that, Father? You aren't afraid, are you?
No, but I respect some of the superstitions of others. Often they are founded in fact.
Broadcasting from our home in Venice, California, this is the Sixth Sense Society. I'm your host, Krista, here with our producer, Michael. And today we are really excited to welcome on the show James Himm Mitchell, who is the dreamer and visionary of life plan coaching and consulting. He works as an intuitive coach with a focus on personal growth and development. His specialties are dream decoding, oracles, and energy medicine. And today we're going to be focusing mostly on his experience with dreams, which I'm very excited about. But before we get started, Michael has a few announcements.
Hi, everybody. Obviously, this is a very different time in our society in general. And here we are at our home. We've dragged all our gear home because we're now in isolation because of the virus. And we hope you're all safe out there. We do beg you, please take this thing seriously. There's a lot of people that can really be harmed by it. And so heed the advice, stay at home if you can. I know that we have that beautiful studio that Sunset Lodge is nice enough to give us where it's all pristine and quiet. And here you may hear our neighbors running up and down the stairs or our crow in the next room crowing and sacrifices we have to make for the greater good. So we encourage you to take it very, very seriously, and we hope that you're all well. We have some great shows coming up in the coming month. First of all, we're ending the month with our good friend Humberto Braga, who has the Guide True Project, and it's a networking site he's creating for healers and tarot readers and psychics and health and wellness people. And it's going to network them with their clients and so forth. It's an incredible project that he's working on. So please tune in for that. Right on cue, there's our crow Lily in the background. And then coming up in the next month, we have all kinds of really cool stuff. We have our good friend Craig Owens coming back, who's a ghost hunter, talking about his latest ghost tours that he's creating, which are just a lot of fun. We're going to have Ray Davis talking about Freemasonry, the world's oldest fraternal organization, who a lot of you are familiar with. And he's the junior warden of Sunset Lodge, will be master in 2 years. And he's just an entertaining guy, so that should also be a great time. And then Renee Starr, who's a witch/Wiccan, incredible person, and she's going to be our final guest in April, and she's going to be talking about witchcraft and spells and all kinds of cool things like that. So lots of fun stuff. Get all the information on our website, sixthsensesociety.com. It's SIXTH, all spelled out. And please subscribe to our YouTube. If you're on the go and you can't watch the video, you can find us as a podcast on Spotify and iTunes and just all your favorite podcast services. Super excited for the show today. I know Krista's been very much looking forward to this one. So without further ado, I'm going to kick it back to her, and let's have a great show, guys.
Great. Thanks so much, Michael. And I also would like to reiterate what Michael said about really self-quarantine, because it contains it. And especially think about all the health workers and all the grocery people and deliverers that are on the front lines. Special shout out to Marcia and Peter Kent, who are in the thick of it, because Marcia's a nurse in Canada. So think about all those people having to really do all this amazing, traumatic work for us. So I think the least we can do is stay at home. So with that, I'm going to introduce again our guest, James Himm Mitchell. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be with you today.
Great. We are so happy you agreed to do this. So my first question is to you is, how did you get interested in dream work?
So what happened is that before I got into my dream work practice, or at least I should say, before I took it seriously, I had dreams just like everyone else that I kind of made note of, but just kind of pushed them to the back burner or didn't really give them any credence. But I had a defining dream. And so the dream was that I was in a space, so I have to kind of give a little backstory. So I was in a space where I was in my early 20s, and I was suicidal. I tried to take my life twice. And the second time, prior to the attempt, I had this dream. And in the dream, I had actually completed the act. So I had taken my own life, and I was standing in a room, and I was in spirit form. And my mother came into the room, and she found my body on the floor, and she was very distraught. And I was standing there watching the scene take place, and I was very happy that she was distraught. And then the dream switched scenes, and so now I'm at my funeral, and I'm seeing all the people who are there to pay their respects. And my mom is standing before my casket, and she's again distraught. And I'm smiling at the fact that she's distraught. And then the dream goes further, and now some time has passed since my funeral, and I'm standing in spirit, and I'm watching my mom, and she's happy. And I am furious that she's happy. And then I wake up. And
Wow.
so I realized, yeah, it's a very profound dream. And so I have to usually give people a kind of a warning when I tell the dream, because it's a serious topic, and it's a little bit morbid in a way.
Mm-hmm.
But it fit what I was going through at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I woke up from the dream, I had a clear understanding of my motivation for wanting to take my life.
Oh,
And
wow.
so it's right. It's because I was having a challenging relationship with my mother, and I wanted it to, at some point or in some way, kind of get back at her, or kind of think like her life was going to fall apart if I wasn't there, kind of thing. And then I realized that she would go on, life would go on, and she would go on, and she would be happy, and then I would still be dead.
Wow,
And
that's
so I
amazing. Yeah,
learned,
that there are a couple, I know there's the Casey people and Eckankar, they both believe, well, especially Casey, that you preview potential futures in your dream.
yeah, I'm a big fan of Edgar Casey, so that resonates with me. But my takeaway from it was, okay, after that moment, or that defining dream moment, I realized that, you know, that would be a permanent solution to a temporary problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so that launched my dream practice, because at that moment, Krista, I took dreams very seriously, and I wanted to explore them. So I started doing dream work. I started keeping a dream journal. That's the first thing, is I started documenting my dreams and keeping a record of my dreams. But that dream was how my dream practice got started.
That is very, very profound. And what is amazing, though, is how you listen to it. So, do you think it's possible that you have worked with dreams in another lifetime?
I could have. I don't know that for sure. I've only had one past life influence type dream, but it wasn't about dreaming in the subject matter, or in the context, or in the content of the dream, but possibly because of the intuitive understanding of the dream when I woke up from it. So that could be true.
Yes, because that's pretty astute when it seems easy when you hear someone interpret a dream, but then I still struggle sometimes with interpretation myself because the dream language is so different.
Yeah, and it's different for everybody. The big thing about doing dream work is that you are having to understand your own personal symbology.
Hmm.
Like, what I've learned over the course of my practice, it's very easy for a dream interpreter to tell you what the dream means. But even in that context, the dream interpreter is using his or her frame of reference, right?
Right.
The big key is that you have to be really cognizant or in touch with your own dream symbology. And it's really just a matter of saying, what does the symbology of the dream mean to me? Because you are the author of the dream. So therefore, on some level, you have an understanding of what the dream means. It's just a matter of getting to excavate, or getting to the deeper meaning of what the symbols mean.
I agree with that too.
But it does
That
take
your
work, like you said.
personal symbolism is very important. So if I was bitten by a dog, I'd have a different relationship to someone that maybe trains dogs, and the symbolism of a dog would mean something in my dreams differently.
Yeah, that's a great analogy, and I use that one myself all the time. I have a belief that we have what's called the collective association for a dream symbol, and then we have the personal. So the collective might be that with a dog, it represents man's best friend, loyalty, trust, obedience, going with the idea of what a dog might mean to everybody, generally speaking. But like you said, if you were bitten by a dog, then the dog in a dream could represent fear or trauma, because of that personal connection or personal association.
Right. I'd like to go back to the dream journal concept because it's a really important concept, but it can be challenging for a variety of reasons. So, how do you approach keeping a dream journal?
So what I do is I keep a pad and pen, or in my case, a spiral notebook by my bed. And then I have to train myself that when I wake up in the morning that I write down whatever I remember in the moment. And I think a lot of people get stuck because they think like they have to remember a whole big long narrative in terms of dreams. What it is that you could just start small. I always use this as an example. So let's say you woke up from a dream and the only thing that you remember is a red wagon, right? And so you write down a red wagon. And then what happens is over time, you are training your conscious mind that the act of remembering your dreams is important. And the more that you commit to writing down, regardless of whether it's a whole dream episode or not, you start to remember more. But I think a lot of people get tripped up is because they think they have to remember a whole dream episode in order to start keeping a dream journal. And that's not true.
I agree with you. I do remember once a long time ago reading in a dream book about a woman who could never remember her dreams until she remembered this tiny fragment. And it was something really innocuous, like a piece of cloth or a certain color. And when she took it to the dream group, they helped her have a breakthrough about some issue in her life from just that fragment. And it does seem, however, I do know people that regularly cannot remember their dreams. So what is your advice to them about how to recall the dream?
That's a great question. So I would offer that when you're lying in bed for the night, you can maybe kind of repeat a mantra in your head about like you are remembering your dreams, you want to remember your dreams hold vital information, kind of ruminate with that over, in your mind over and over again until you fall asleep. And then again, it's the act of writing down whatever you remember when you wake up. Another thing that you can do, and I've learned this for myself, is that you remember either more clearly or you remember more, generally speaking, when you kind of commit to a regular schedule in terms of sleep. When we have disruptive sleep patterns, that can affect our ability to recall. So that would be another thing. Another thing you could do is set the scene, so to speak, when you're about to retire for the night. So you could create a ritual that centers on the act of wanting to remember your dreams. I know, like early on in my practice, I did this wonderful thing where and I don't know if they're in your area, but we have store chains here called Bath and Body Works. And at the time, I would get this lavender vanilla spray. Oh, it's a wonderful thing. And then I would roll down the sheet from my bed and spray the spray on my sheet. So this way I had that scent as I was getting into the bed and retiring for the evening. I would have that scent. That would help me. It would trigger the act like, oh, I'm doing this in preparation to remember my dreams. So it would be something like that. Anything you could do to kind of set the stage. It's similar to like when I meditate. I like to get out my frankincense, incense, light a candle, all those kinds of things. In this way, I'm preparing for the act of meditation, right? It's kind of similar to that. What could you do to prepare yourself for the act of dream recall?
That's cool. I've never really heard of doing a ritual like that. And that makes total sense. Just like you said, you approach meditation like that and prayer, and why not the dream world? One of the things I
Right.
like about dreams, and let me see what you think about this, is that it's the one thing we all have access to improve and help our lives that we don't utilize enough.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. I always tell people that dreams are your nightly resource because we all dream, right? Everyone dreams. So it's your nightly resource to check in with yourself. And then I also believe that dreams are designed to help us heal and improve every aspect of our life. So I'm in agreement with you 100% on that.
Yes, I've been listening a little to one of Edgar Casey's, I guess, students in a sense. Kevin, is it Todaski, or I forget his last name. I'm so sorry, but he has a couple of YouTube videos, and he believes, like you, that you can use it for every aspect from ordinary to spiritual. And he talks about how to do it too in a very down to earth way, which I really like. Um, Give us maybe a few examples of how you use your dreams in your life.
Sure. So one defining dream that I had, aside from the one that I shared earlier on, had to do with how I started my tarot practice. And so I had this dream where I was reading playing cards because at the time I was not familiar with tarot cards. I had never seen a tarot card and never heard of a tarot card. But in my frame of reference, I was familiar with playing cards. So I was reading my own cards, again, which is something I had never done in waking life. So that was a sign that the dream was significant because it was an act in the dream that I had never done in waking life. So I'm reading for myself and I'm taking notes. And that was basically the dream. So I woke up from the dream really intrigued. And so at the time I had a dream dictionary on my bedside table and I looked up playing cards and it just so happened to be an entry in the dream, in the book, I should say. And it said that playing cards were directly related to tarot cards. And again, now I had never seen or heard of a tarot card. So this is what I did with the dream. Because I had never heard of tarot, I decided I was going to research that. I wanted to know what tarot was. So I took action on the dream by going to the public library right down the street from my house. And at the time, there was only one book on tarot on the shelf. So that was the book I checked out. And I read the book. And for your audience, if they're tarot fluent, the book was the Tarot Handbook by the late Angela Scarian. So that was my first primer into tarot. And a few months later, after doing some more research on tarot, I got my first deck.
Wow.
But that was a very defining dream, and that's actually how I became a card reader.
What was your first deck?
It was the Crowley Toss Tarot because that was the deck that was illustrated in the book. And so that became my only frame of reference for tarot. So when I went looking for my first deck, since I had that in mind, that was what I got.
Oh, that's cool. I love that. When I didn't really have a dream that led me to the tarot, but when I started working with the tarot, I had some unusual dreams about how to read the tarot. So for instance, I remember laying out the cards and my dream was telling me that the cards were lighting up in different orders, and I got from the dream that I should read the cards that seemed more lit and go from, I didn't have to read them in a sequence, but watching if I felt they kind of were brighter. And I had some, of course, now once you start doing readings, you start having all kinds of tarot card readings, but I feel like it was it was good because at the time I didn't know how to put the cards together because most books don't teach you that.
Oh, I love that.
So yeah,
I love that.
So let's talk a little bit about what kinds of dreams you can have. For instance, in my experience from reading and my own, is there seems to be different types of dreams, from psychic dreams to spiritual dreams to mundane dreams to travels to other worlds. What do you think about that? What do you think are the kinds of dreams that we can have?
Oh, sure. Yeah, they do definitely fall into categories. The most common would be the processing dreams, right? So I call those the psychological processing dreams. So you experience something in your waking life, and then your dream life will help you process it. So let's just say, as an example, let's say you have an experience where there's an altercation between you and another person, like almost like a fight, like somebody's raging in your face. And you in the waking life experience don't say anything, right? You kind of just take that on. And then you may have a dream that night where you are yelling at the person, right? You have a replay of the experience, only this time in the dream life, you are expressing your opinion or you're yelling back or something of that nature, and it's helping you process the event, right? So this way you can work through it in a healthy way, right? Mm-hmm. You're doing it on the subconscious level in a healthy way, and then you get to release that because you have now processed it. Most of our dreams are what I call the processing type. Then there are the precognitive dreams. If we go into the spiritual aspect, a number of my dreams over a period of time, like a year or so, were precognitive. Mm-hmm. And for those who are listening and don't know what that is, they are dreams that foretell future events. But the thing about it is when you're having a dream, you may not know it's precognitive until the event actually takes place. So there's that. There are anxiety dreams. And so those dreams help you process situations in which you have worry, concern, or anxiety. Those are like dreams where you're falling, or dreams where you are naked in public, or dreams where you are taking a test and all of a sudden you prepared for the test and then your mind goes blank. Or I've seen or heard that, sometimes people are taking a test and then the test paper goes blank. Like it's just like all of a sudden, like you know something, but in the moment where you need to know it, you forget. I'm trying to think of some other ones. But those are the three that I can think of. Yes, there are other types of spiritual dreams, dreams where you are discovering what your spiritual gifts or abilities are. Those are my favorite.
Mm-hmm.
Dreams that are showing past life influence. I mentioned that before. There are past life dreams. Again, there are all sorts of dreams, but the most common, I would say, goes back to the first one, which would be the processing type dream.
That makes sense because that's very helpful and useful on a regular day-to-day basis. And I do notice that you actually study psychology at Ashford University. So do you have any psychological writers or mentors in your mind that you go to study dreams, like, for instance, Jung or anyone else that is Freud, that you have learned from yourself?
Right. I would say I would have to pick Jung as one of mine because I love the idea that everything in the dream is an aspect of the dreamer, which is his approach, and also about working with archetypes. For instance, like the one that's coming to me in the moment is the wise man or the wise woman.
Mm-hmm.
You look for symbology that represents some sort of archetype or the child or the parent or things like that. But yeah, I would take more of a Jung approach rather than a Freud approach or Freudian approach.
What's interesting, I think the benefit, for instance, of keeping long-term dream journals is sometimes I have found you can see archetypal themes as well as the introduction of a new archetype. Have you found that to be true?
Yes, and I've also discovered, from my own experience with my own dreams, that sometimes a dream that you have sometimes will continue to play out over a course of time. So that's an interesting thing. Like, for instance, my playing card dream. So it started out where I was reading for myself, and then it branched out to the type of decks that I would use. Like, for instance, I talked about the Crowley Talk deck, being my first deck. And then I thought about the dream over time, and I thought, well, there were playing cards in the dream, so I wonder if I was supposed to be reading playing cards, going with the literal aspect of it,
Mm-hmm.
rather than tarot. And so I had what I call a further dream or a follow-up dream in which I was in a school and I was in a classroom and next to me on the floor, and it was in a huge spotlight, so couldn't miss it, right, because it was being spotlighted.
Mm-hmm.
And there were houses of cards. So I walked over to the cards and I picked them up one by one. And when I looked into my hands, I had a blend of tarot and playing cards. And so for me, that was telling me in my practice to blend the two systems in a way that made sense to me in terms of reading.
Well, I think this is an interesting aspect to dreams in general is the practical, obvious information that perhaps, say, if I'm too psychologically oriented, I might ignore that you did not ignore and there are famous examples too of problems that have been solved, including the needle in the sewing machine was solved through a dream that was really interesting, and using the dreams for regular day-to-day actions and even finding your path. So I think it's great you follow it.
Absolutely. Everything that I have done in my waking life first came as a result of having a dream. The dream came first, and then I followed it, and then took that path out. So I'm a big believer in that. Absolutely.
And one of the things I have found, but I've also read this in some of the dream books, is that the more you respond to your subconscious, it likes it and gives you even more information. Have you found that to be true?
Yes, and that goes back to what we talked about previously with the recall aspect, right? It's the same thing. It's a psychological thing. Like the more that you are training your mind that you want to remember, the more you will remember. And when you are taking action on your dreams, you will have more dreams to remember or to respond to. Because here's the thing, most people generally stop just the interpretation aspect of it. But dreams want you to actually take action on the dream. They want you to do something with the information. It's not enough to understand what the dream means. It's like, I would say dream wisdom is saying, okay, that's great. You've got the information. Now, what are you willing to do with it?
What I found in my research that was fascinating is how many people got health warnings way ahead of time and they actually listened. One of the most interesting ones was a magazine I read where a woman had some kind of an illness that debilitated her. They could not figure out what it was, the doctors, and she was just getting really tired and weak, and it was critical but not life-threatening. She just couldn't function well. So in her dream, one night, this she bear appeared and basically over several months guided her to improve her health. And because she didn't know what else to do, she trusted the bear. In a lot of Native American lore, the bear is the teacher to the teachers and is associated with healing. So I thought that was remarkable. I remember thinking like, wow, how amazing. And I've read more than one accounts of people finding out ahead of time and taking care, like you said, taking action. What do you think about the health element of dreams?
Oh, absolutely. For me personally, I had a dream which helped me uh, let go of caffeine. And so it was a wonderful thing. And here's the most interesting part about that. So normally I would have gone into caffeine withdrawal, and so usually my big tell was getting headaches my body was going into caffeine withdrawal.
Hmm.
So what happened was when I honored the dream, when I recognized what the dream was trying to tell me, and I took action on it, I did not have any of my usual caffeine withdrawal symptoms, that was my clear sign that I was on task with that.
Hmm.
So I'm a big believer in it. Mine was maybe more minute or not as large as the dream that you just shared about the bear. But yeah, even in small ways, dreams could help you. Like even as something as like you need to let go of caffeine can come about in a
Well,
dream.
caffeine it can affect, caffeine's interesting because it can help people in some ways and it can really affect certain people's nervous systems. I recently was listening to I don't know if he's a psychologist or something like that, but he was talking about introverts versus extroverts, and that introverts, caffeine can be very difficult for them compared to an extrovert, which I'd never thought about really. And they shouldn't have a lot of caffeine, or if you have a lot of anxiety or you're a more wired nervous system. So I think that you're wise to follow the course of what your body is telling you. Again, sort of like the personal symbols, you have a personal connection to your health that is unique.
Absolutely. And your dreams are always wanting to talk to you about that. Again, but like you said, it's all about knowing what your personal symbology is, and you have to know when a dream is health related. And so that could be another category, since we talked about categories before, that we are dreaming about is our health, our physical well being, and what we can do to improve that.
Yeah, I like that. It is. I do think that would be a category in and of itself. So the more, and again, it's mostly I've read a lot of really amazing stories that really inspired me to listen more to the warnings I get in my dreams. Let's talk a little bit about nightmares, since that's one of the areas that there's some literature on it, but not a lot to tell you the truth. What is your experience with nightmares? What's your advice with nightmares?
But that's a great question. So my belief about nightmares is that they are dreams that we really need to be paying attention to. And they give us the dream imagery or the dream message in a way that we won't forget. So that's my take on nightmares, because we always can remember a nightmare, right? We might not remember the pleasant, beautiful, wonderful dream, but we sure as heck can always remember a bad dream or a frightening dream. So that's the first thing I always say, that yes, the content of the dream may be disturbing, but it's a way of getting your attention so that you won't forget it. And it really begs for you to work with it, because there may be some sort of fear or some sort of trauma that wants to be healed or addressed. And it's just getting you to look at it in a way that you won't forget it. So I always think that they're the most significant kind of dreams to have or to receive, because they really are asking you to pay attention to them, to kind of heed them. But they give it to you in a way you won't forget. That's the biggest thing about nightmares.
Good point. Yes,
Opinion.
because it's shouting at you, and you're more, like you said, you're more obviously going to remember the nightmare because it's frightening, and you wake up a lot of times. Now,
Absolutely.
one of the things
Absolutely.
I had to do for one of my clients is look up the difference between nightmare and PTSD dreams. And what I determined was evidently PTSD dreams are the exact repetition of the experience with no change at all. Whereas, you know how nightmares can kind of shift a little if you don't get it the first time, they might try a different image. Is that your experience too of the differences between a PTSD dream versus a nightmare?
Yeah, I would say so. And because the PTSD dream would be repeating the traumatic event, right? So that's usually what the person is experiencing, right? Or wanting to heal from. So they're going to be replaying that particular experience. So yes, it would be a dream and it would be a recurring dream. And that's another category that's coming to me in the moment is recurring dreams. But yeah, so a PTSD dream would just repeat the experience, whereas a nightmare could just be about anything that's frightening.
Yeah, and it's interesting to make that difference so people then know, you know, to go get treated for PTSD, and whereas a nightmare might be, the treatment would be different, is what it seems like to me.
Right. And as we're talking about that, this is the thought that's coming to me in the moment with that. The PTSD dream, because it's recurring and it's recurring with a particular event, would be an unconscious way of saying, I want to deal with this, or, I'm ready to take this on, but maybe it's about pursuing the avenue in waking life to help with that. So if you're having a dream again and again and again, it might prompt you to maybe seek out, a counselor or a therapist or somebody who specializes in whatever the experience is to help you move through it.
Now, what do you think of the concept of working with synchronicities in dreams? So let's say I have a dream one night and then just the synchronicity the next day, I'm seeing the same imagery. What would you recommend people do with that?
I think those are dreams that you just want to take notice of. I think depending on what your spiritual path is or whatever you believe spiritually speaking, I would look at that as going like, oh, somehow I'm on track. Or it's like a wink from the divine or the universe, whatever you call that for yourself. And then I might even say that that might be a little bit of a precog dream, because you had the experience in dream life and then you had it in waking life. So for me, that might be showing you that you have an intuitive ability, a psychic ability, a precognitive ability, depending on the word that you want to use for that. So it could be two things at the same time.
Makes sense. I like that a lot. What do you think about
Yeah.
people that like to or talk about the idea of being able to astral travel in your body when you're dreaming? And if you think that's valid, how would I know the difference with that versus, say, a processing dream?
Oh, that's a great question. So I've had one astral travel dream, so I'll just use mine as a frame of reference. So I was away from my home at the time. I was vacationing, and in the dream, I had flown to my apartment, and I was having my apartment watched by my neighbors. And in my dream, I was floating above or outside of my window, and I saw my neighbor close my window. And then I woke up from the dream. So I get home to discover because I had actually left my apartment window open when I left, and he came into my apartment and closed the window because it was going to rain that day, and she didn't want the rain to get in to my apartment through my window. But I saw that because I had astral traveled to that moment where he was closing the window. And so those kinds of dreams can let you know that you actually have the ability to astral project or astral travel. I'm a big believer in that our dreams can show us what our spiritual gifts and abilities are. And so astral travel and projection is actually a spiritual gift. And so if you're constantly dreaming of astral travel, it could just be suggesting that that is a gift that you have to work with.
Oh, I see. So then you would work with it in the waking world too, then.
Absolutely, yes. Usually the undercurrent with an astral travel, astral projection type gift is it's showing how strong your mind is because you're projecting your mind somewhere else. So usually then you wake up and say, okay, where else can I project up my mind that strongly? You don't have to astral project in waking life, but it's just really showing you that you have a very strong mind and that you could put yourself wherever you want to be at any moment.
I like that interpretation. I've never really heard it put that way because most of the time I've thought of just astral travel as like the ability to travel other places and not as a connection to the strength of your mind. I really like that a lot.
Yeah.
So another thing
Yeah. So
go ahead. Sorry.
no, I was just about to say. So yeah, just like you were saying, astral traveling in dreams allows us to see different worlds, different dimensions. That could be another way of expanding your consciousness in a way, because you get to see aspects that you may not be in touch with or conscious of in waking life. So I look at that as maybe a way of expanding your mind, maybe getting you to see that there's more to this reality than what we experience when we're awake. So that would be another way of dealing with or looking at astral travel type dreams.
Oh, on that theme, I remember when I lived in Woodstock in my 30s, my one of my teachers, she was an amazing dreamer, and she also had neighbors that had met each other in different countries in the dream, and they recognized each other, and they ended up, I don't know if they got married, but they were in a strong relationship, and they were living next door to her. And I remember thinking, like, that's amazing that they trusted it and that they literally must have astral traveled to meet each other.
I love that. And I want to just point out that there's a theme here in our conversation. You've mentioned the word several times, and it's trust. And really what it is, it's just really about trusting your dream wisdom and trusting the dream guidance that you're getting. But here's the thing, it's really going deeper than that. It's really about trusting yourself, because that's more about your inner wisdom. It's just trusting your own inner wisdom and inner guidance.
I love that. And I think that is one of the goals that a lot of people have that want to trust their intuition. And I never really thought of how the dream world is a very straightforward way to teach us to trust all of our abilities. Again, because most of us have access to at least some aspect to a dream, even if it's only one dream every 3 months. And I think that you're onto something there. I know that you work with people and you have, what is it called? Dream Decoder Coaching Session. So I'd like you to talk a little
Yes,
bit about how that works.
sure, absolutely. So what happens in a dream decoding session is that when a person comes to see me, prior in my practice, I used to just interpret dreams for people. I would say, this is what your dream means, and kind of send them on their way. But in a dream decoding session, what it is I sit with the person, and the person tells me what their dream is. And I just pay attention. Sometimes if they're in my presence, I like to get out an easel pad, and I like to write out all the symbolism. So I ask them to tell me, what are the symbols in their dream? So then we make a list of the symbols. And then I say, what are the emotions that are experienced in the dream? Make a list of those. What are the actions that are taking place in the dream? Make a list of those. And then what I do is I have the person kind of just tell me in their own frame of experience what all the symbolism means to them. So for instance, let's say a person dreams about what's coming to me in the moment is Pele, the soccer player. I don't know why I'm thinking about that. That's what came to me. So I might have a personal frame of reference for Pele, but it's better because the dreamer is the author of the dream to ask them, in your frame of reference, tell me what Pele means to you, right? So if the person is a soccer player, it could mean like, that's about a personal sport that they like or that they engage in, or if they're not a soccer player but they just fancy it, it could be a matter of a sport that they just like for whatever reason. But there may be all sorts of connections or associations they have with that. But again, I just have them run through it, and then all we do is we just plug all the associations back into the dream, and we tell the narrative with all the associations that they have now defined into the dream, and that becomes their meaning of the dream, not mine, but theirs, right? What happens is they become more of a participant in their dream experience rather than a spectator. If I'm telling them what the dream means, there's a more passive role. It's a more kind of spectator type role.
Mm-hmm.
But when we're doing it that way, they become more of a participant in their own process.
And do you find that leads to them doing that more on their own as well once they, do some sessions with you?
Yes, especially the ones who have what I call the profound aha moments when we're running through a dream together. And I love seeing the look on their face when that happens. But yeah, whenever they have a profound moment, in that moment, they get to see how powerful their dreams can be. And it has led to some people, not all people, but some people actively working with their dreams from that point on because they see the value in that information.
One of the things I like in the Eckankar books, the spiritual dreaming book, is that's their whole premise is working with dreams, but you can use it to sort of honestly see if you are growing spiritually. And so I was working for a couple years on my inner critic, and I could tell from my dreams it was starting to work. Then one day I relapsed. And I had the funniest dream that night because even though it seems kind of like it was sort of lecturing me, it was kind of funny. I had a dream that my lips had been sewed up. So even though I wasn't speaking like literally my critical inner, it was basically telling me, okay, Krista, and I remember, it helped me to catch it and go back to using the tools I was using to help work inwardly. And I remember thinking like, wow, why didn't I ever think of this before? Because your dreams seem to be more honest and in ways that can even be kind of playful.
Absolutely. And another thing, because we talked about this before with the PTSD, if a person is engaged in any kind of healing modality in waking life, like therapy or counseling, let's say, their dreams will show them the progress that they're making with that particular healing modality. So that's another way that dreams can be helpful, especially if you're engaged in some kind of therapy, especially that, because they will show you the progress that you're making with the therapeutic practice.
Yes, in the Eckankar group, they believe that the voice of God comes through things like light, imagery of light, sound, music, and those are just in a way that's saying you're connecting to that. What is your experience of that?
And that goes back to personal symbology. So for me, like if I'm dreaming about being in a church, that's a spiritual dream. If I'm dreaming about let's say a character in a dream is like my minister, that would be a spiritual dream. Going back to personal symbology, it would have to be whatever the person would define as God, right? We all have different ways of looking at God. So whatever they language God to be, they may have personal symbology that matches that. And they would know that, they're having a spiritual dream or a dream where they're feeling like they're being given guidance or instruction from that higher power. Right. So again, most people would probably associate light with God. Right. So, again, it just goes to the person and whatever they language divine to be. But for me, it's more concrete. Usually for me, it's like if you're dreaming about being in a temple or being in a mosque or being in a church, that's a spiritually related dream. Or if you're dreaming about, a deity, let's say I'm thinking of like Hindu deities right now, I'm thinking about Lakshmi, the goddess of abundance or prosperity. So let's say you had a dream about Lakshmi, that would be a spiritually based dream, because it's a spiritual deity, right?
Right.
Or an angel, I fancy angels. So if I have an angel dream, that for me is a spiritually based dream. Like for instance, I had a dream once where I was talking to Archangel Metatron, but the thing about it was when I woke up, I couldn't remember what Metatron looked like. And I couldn't remember the conversation in any shape, form, or fashion. But I just had this knowing that I was in the presence of Metatron and we had this dialogue. I just knew it when I woke up, but I couldn't remember any of the details. So that for me would be a spiritually based dream if I'm dreaming about angels. So it just depends on the person and however they define spirituality.
So I know that Robert Moss believes that you can go back into dreams consciously, and he has techniques. And let's say you wanted to get more information that you couldn't remember, and it's sort of like based, I think, on Jungian active imagination. Have you ever worked with a technique like that?
I haven't personally, and that makes me think of like lucid dreaming where you are consciously aware of the fact that you're dreaming. I had those kinds of episodes, but for me, it's my thing is like I don't want to disrupt or interfere with the message that was intended. So sometimes I think like when we do that, it kind of maybe disrupts or interferes with the message the way you were originally supposed to get it. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it. Sometimes it's helpful when you want to move beyond a recurring dream, like we talked about that earlier. So let's say you're having a recurring dream and it stops at a particular sticking point and you want to move beyond that, then you could consciously set the intention of going back in the dream to move beyond that point. And I think that would be helpful, because that helps you with the recurring aspect usually my take on a recurring dream is like you're not getting the message because you keep having the dream, or you're not taking action on it in waking life, which is why you keep having the dream. And so
That
once you
makes sense.
understand the message, yeah. So once you understand the message or take action on it, the dream will stop. And I know that to be true. But the fact that you could go back into a dream, sometimes it could be to further the dream along to get beyond a certain point, which might be helpful, especially like if it keeps stopping at the same point and you're getting frustrated because you want to know more, or you want the dream to expound on it. So you could consciously set the intention for that. So I could see that being helpful, or incorporating that into a practice of some kind. But I tend not to disrupt the initial message of the dream the way it was sent to me or delivered to me.
I like that. And I did want to talk a little about lucid dreaming because I went through a period where, since I have had a lot of nightmares in my life, and I was using lucid dreaming based on a recommendation from a friend, actually, and it was working. It was really interesting to wake up in a dream and know you are dreaming. But the funniest one I remember, was I woke up in the dream and it was nothing big going on at the time, but there was a bus going across the road, and I told myself I could go in front of that bus and I could get hit and I wouldn't die. And then I thought, what if I'm wrong? And so I didn't do it. It's like, so it is. There's even lots of groups, I think, that are really specializing in lucid dreaming. So how have you worked with lucid dreaming in your life?
So the common way that I experience lucid dreaming is when we talked about nightmares earlier. So usually if I'm having a disturbing dream, I will have some moment of awareness in the dream that I'm dreaming. And I will tell myself, I'm not liking this, and I'm going to wake up now. And then I wake up. So the moment of lucidity helps me to realize that I'm not enjoying the dream. And then I can wake up from it. So that's usually the only way that I work with lucid dreaming, is I just have a moment of lucidity as the dream is taking place, and it wakes me up. And then I go back to what I said previously, and then I go, okay, I'm awake from the dream, and so I can process whatever the emotions I have about the dream, like the upsetting nature of it, or the fact that it was disturbing, or the fact that I may even be a little fearful, right? So I work through that, and then I go, okay, but the dream was significant because it wants me to recognize something, and so then I want to work with it on some level. But in the moment that I'm experiencing it, I go, I'm not liking this, and I'm going to wake up now. So that's how I experience lucid dreaming for me.
Yeah, that's totally a very useful and valid way, I think, to use it. What is your position or thoughts, I would say, on visitations from the dead in dreams?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I have not experienced that all that much myself, but I have had lots of clients come to me and wanting to know about that. And so for me, I call those dream visits. First you have to be a person who actually believes that you can communicate with those who have crossed over. So that has to be part of it too, right? And so usually what happens in those dream visits is that it's just a message from the person who has transitioned, that they just want you to know that they're okay. And so usually what happens is you see the person, and if the person maybe had a health condition or some kind of illness or some sort of health-related experience that kind of helped them transition, you usually in the dream don't see them in that way. You usually see them, they're vibrant, they're happy. They may even be like glowing in a way, like they have some sort of light around them.
Right.
And usually the communication in the dream is not like, you may see their lips move, but you don't hear anything coming out of their mouth. Usually it's more telepathic in nature, like you hear what it is they want to say in your head kind of thing. But usually the gist of those kinds of dreams is they just want you to know that they're okay. But I call those dream visits, and they can be very profound, especially for the person who's dealing with maybe grief, grieving that person's loss. Those dreams can be so helpful in that process.
I think so. And I think, of course, belief probably plays into the role for a lot of people, though there does seem to be a lot of esoteric people. For instance, I know Rudolf Steiner has a whole book called Staying Connected, on literally cultivating relationships with the dead that are healthy, where you get a healthy connection, not, one based on repetition of trauma and things like that. So I guess it does depend on your belief system.
Yeah. And another thing about those types of dreams, going with the spiritual gift and ability aspect, if you're a type of person who's constantly or frequently dreaming about communicating with the dead, it may be a sign that you are actually a medium or a channel, and the dreams are actually getting you to, or encouraging you to work with that ability in waking life more. So that's
That
another
goes
way of
back to
looking
what
at
you
those
were
types.
saying earlier, to actually take the advice of the gifts that are offered in your dreams. So in a way, you could also help people with dreaming if they're not sure of their purpose in life and what gifts they're meant to use. I do remember reading a woman had a dream about painting, and she started painting and she became a painter. It was that simple. I mean, it seems like the dreams sometimes are so obvious, just like life, we don't want to pay attention to the obvious.
Right? Yeah. I mean, again, going back to what I said earlier about myself, I've had lots of life-defining dreams, like taking action on them and set me down a particular path. But everything came with the dream first. So I love hearing the fact that a woman became a painter as a result of having a dream first. I love that.
Now, Michael does not always remember his dreams, but when he does, he has these like epic ones. But there was an occasion, I wrote a poem about it, where we both had a similar dream, and they were different symbols, but we woke up and it was interesting. So is it possible for people that are close to share motifs in dreams while they're sleeping?
Yes, that is an actual phenomenon. It's called mutual dreaming or mutual sharing, and it usually takes place with people who are in uh, intimate relationships. So it could be partners or spouses, especially, because they share closeness, right? They share a life. So they may dream the same thing. The dream symbology might be slightly different to fit each person, but the theme of the dream or aspects of the dream will be quite similar. But it is called mutual sharing or mutual dreaming. It is a thing.
Wow. So do you have people come and ask you about that in your coaching?
I've experienced that more with like spouses more than anything else, but it can also take place with family members. Like I've heard of like mothers and daughters,
Mm-hmm.
having similar type dreams, or siblings having similar type dreams, and they experience them at the same time. That's the other part of the mutual sharing or mutual dreaming phenomenon, is that they each have it at the same time.
It's pretty fascinating. I remember really being surprised by that. Now, another thing
Yeah.
is that this whole idea of collective dreaming, in terms of if we had a way to notice it, we can sometimes see themes forming. So I know Jung has a famous story about seeing the war, but he didn't realize what he was seeing until after the fact. What it was, images of what was coming. And he also evidently saw it in patients, similar imagery that reflected what was coming. What do you think about that idea?
I think that's true. I think if I had to kind of go with a personal experience where that might fit in terms of collective, it makes me think of September 11th, 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
I know for a fact that there was a collective kind of consciousness. We all had dreams. A lot of us had dreams about 9/11 before it happened. I was one of those people. And of course, again, like you were saying, I did not know it was a 9/11 dream while I was experiencing it until the event took place. But there were lots of people who said that they had a knowing, and a lot of them a knowing through dreams about that particular event. So I believe that's the thing. And again, going with, if we make it not so much about the collective and bring it back to the personal, that would just be another way of identifying a possible precognitive ability
That you pick
for
up
the
on the
individual.
collective pulse. You know, I
Right. And
go ahead.
I was about to say, and there is this thing about psychic energy. We all pick up, as a collective, we all pick up on psychic energy. So that would be another reason, or maybe another underlying thing about that kind of experience. We're all picking up on psychic energy.
I agree. And after it happened, people came and told me some of their dreams about 9/11, including one of my good friends literally saw a plane crashing into buildings, but she really thought she was concerned about her sister traveling. but it was just
Oh,
the literal event. It was only about a week ahead. And then I heard some other stories. They were all coming to me, were all either very awake kind of people or even readers and psychics. And so I was thinking that it's too bad we don't have like a way to collectively, trust that. But I suppose we'll probably evolve to that at some point as a species, as a way of maybe either altering or modifying things or preparing for things. So I don't know. What do you think about? Oh, my dove has just descended. What do you think about? Is it possible then to alter certain collective futures, or are we just meant to know to prepare?
that's a great question. I would say it's probably twofold. Number one, it would be to kind of recognize the potential for this particular future event. And I say this because I'm a big believer that the future is not ever written in stone,
Hmm.
right? I'm a big believer that we all have the power of free will and choice. And so sometimes when we're given something that may seem precognitive and we're aware of the fact that it's future oriented, it may be giving us a heads up to say, do you want to go down this path, or are you willing to make a different choice or take a different course of action that would alter that? That's my take on when I read for people and we're looking at future oriented scenarios. I never tell them that this is fated to happen or um, this is going to happen without a shadow of a doubt. I always go, if you continue on this road that you're on, that this is the most likely or most probable outcome. And if I language it like that in the course of a reading, I have to be able to kind of language that in a dream context, right? Dreams are always giving us information, but we get to decide what we're going to do with the information.
Hmm. I think
And whether that's a
I agree with
personal,
that for the most part. I think that because since I do tarot card readings too, we look at probabilities. Now, what I've noticed are there's some probabilities that are already so much in motion, it'd be tricky to change them, but that doesn't mean it's impossible because we're still evolving into how we can shift reality. I met when we were first doing readings on the waterfront in Halifax. I met this man who was an indigenous man by birth, and he was returning to those practices. And he came out from LA, and he'd actually been in the porn business, and he left that business, and he wanted to become, connected to his roots. And he was really an amazing, inspiring person because I would do these like once a week readings. I think I just did it for free. He was just kind of a fellow. He sold t-shirts on the waterfront, and he could shift his energy incredibly fast because if you read for someone weekly, you notice some of the cards are quite similar. And he's the only person I've ever really seen be able to do that so well. And I think that he truly was or is a shaman and that he can shift his reality. So he inspired me to the thought that, okay, maybe there's more we can do, but we're not quite there yet, the majority of us. We can do some of it, but we still don't know all of the principles. And because when I asked him, he just kind of smiled and said, I just do what the cards suggest. And I thought there's more to it than that, you know? So he's
right?
a
And
remarkable
maybe
person.
at that moment, yeah, maybe in that moment too, like maybe he's not fully aware of his capability either. If he's just saying like, I just do what the cards tell me, he may not be fully aware of what he's truly capable of.
Yeah, and he was going through the training and getting back to his roots but I it really, some people really impress upon me what they do with information, both positively and negatively, where I'll see someone that will be stuck for so long and then someone that will shift something immediately. And even though, our tools are helpful, it's still them doing the work.
Absolutely. 100% agree with you on that.
So how can people reach you? I have a couple of contacts. I have James Himm, JamesHimm.com. Is that correct?
Yes, and that's a cheap way. Usually just visiting my website is the best way to get in touch with me. Also, too, if they scroll down to the bottom of the homepage, all my contact information is there. So there's also my email address and my phone number.
That's right. You have James at JamesHimm with HIMM.com and JamesHimm at yahoo.com. There's 2 M's in him. And we really thank you for coming on our show in this sort of experimental way, since we're really having to change our lives, all of us, in the wake of this phenomena that we're all going through together, hopefully. So thank you so much. It's been really fascinating.
Well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed this conversation so much.
Oh, good. Well, we'll have more, I hope, in the future. And for information about us, we will be doing readings only on phone and Skype and Zoom, so you can get hold of us at mysticraven.net. So take care of each other right now through this time. I believe in all of you that you're going to be fine, and it's going to make you stronger in all ways. So until next time, stay safe, stay connected, while we continue to explore the esoteric and the obscure together.